Alrighty, how's everybody doing? We're going to get started doing some intermediate front-end development projects with freeCodeCamp, and we're going to start off with our random quote machine, or build a random quote machine is the name of it. So I want to start off, hopefully you've already gone through some of the first ones. There's a tribute page, and then there's a personal portfolio. I should have some videos out about those as well. If you haven't, you can check that stuff out. But we're going to start building off of that. So first thing you need to do is make sure you're in CodePen, and I'm going to give you a preview here by sharing my screen about what we're going to build. And as you can see here, I have a simple background with some text. I have a button to get a quote that changes, and I have a button to tweet it out. And when you click tweet, it'll load in and give me Twitter, all right, whenever that loads. All right, so let's see what we have going on here now. As you can see, I have a background image, I have a div here, I have a title, and some text that gets changed. So I'm going to start off with a brand new pen, and I'm just going to call this one YouTube. YouTube. Quote machine. All right, so that's good to go. And I want to start off actually someplace different. I've seen a lot of people start off in HTML or JavaScript. I'm actually going to start off with some CSS. The reason I want to start off here in CSS is because we're doing a simple one-page app, and one of the most annoying things I found is to try to get a background to actually fit. All right, and we're going to be building around a background. I'm going to tell you what I mean in a minute, but I found a chunk of code here. If I go to my CSS, and I'm just going to copy and paste this out of my sample. And this is code that I found, all right, which I have in the body tag. I found over here at csxtricks.com, and perfect full page background image. And basically, they give you a background URL. You drop in a URL that you want with an image in it. And what this does is you don't get any tiling, and it just always covers the screen without any issues. Works really well. I like that a lot about this. So this is what I use for most of my projects. So I want to start off with that. And then I'm going to come back to some CSS a little bit later on as well. But for now, what you can see, if I change my view, I'll click Save. If I change my view and I go into full page here, looks like Twitter's blocked on my Wi-Fi here, so it's going to be a bit annoying for later on. But I found this image. It's an inspirational looking image. There's sunlight there. The main reason I chose this is because I just want to use plain black text, and I'm kind of lazy, so I can get away with plain black text if I have something with a very light background. And there's light blue here, which match Bootstrap buttons really nicely, so I just looked for that as well. So again, just making it easier for myself later to come out with something that looks really nice. So here we go. So now that we have our CSS done and we have a background image itself, I'm going to start by building out some framework here in HTML. Now, we know we're going to be using Bootstrap and later on jQuery. So what I'm going to do is, because I'm going to be using Bootstrap in a few places here, I'm going to go open up my settings, go to CSS, and I'm going to actually add in quick add Bootstrap here. I'm going to save that. And what else I would need to make sure that I add in is going to be the Font Awesome. Now, Font Awesome has a lot of really cool icons and stuff. So if you just Google Font Awesome CDN, and you'll get a Bootstrap CDN for Font Awesome, which is nothing more than this little web address that we need by copying and pasting this into our settings for our CSS. Okay, and that's all this is. It's going into your CSS and copying, pasting these in, and now we can use Font Awesome icons, which are really, really cool. So Font Awesome icons, and the ones that I'm going to use are going to be, you can kind of search through all these if you want. I'm going to be using the Twitter icon here. And then I'm also going to be using the quote icon, okay? So those are just kind of help us out here. And the one I actually chose to use, if I type quote, you can see there's a right quote, a left quote. We'll use the quote left, I guess, or well, you can pick either one you want. But there you go. There's these really nice icons that they have to use. So we have that. And then while we're adding stuff in, I'm not going to be putting in any vanilla JavaScript, so I'm only going to be using jQuery. So I'm going to add in jQuery here as well, just because it makes our all of our coding a lot easier. All right, basically we can just get away with less code essentially, which is what we want. So now we have some basic CSS in the background, which gives us a nice background image, and that'll help us decide what we want to do. If you notice, my background image has a very large bright spot in the center, so it kind of draws right to the center as it is. So I'm going to actually center everything in here. All right, I'm going to allow for different backgrounds because I'm assuming you're going to want a different background as well. So I'm just going to break this up into a few different divs. I could probably get away with just one body and centering everything for what I'm doing, but I want to break it up a little bit. So I'm going to start off with our body tag. All right, so the body slash body. There's our body tag that everything goes inside. And notice that in the CSS itself, I was grabbing the body itself. So whatever's inside this body is going to fit nicely on this background, which is what I want. All right, so there's that. So body tag. And the next thing we're going to do, because we're using Bootstrap, and I don't want I want this to be responsive, and I don't just want it to be responsive to just certain sizes, small, medium, large, extra large, like you're constrained to in Bootstrap. I just want it to just automatically change and be fluid, no matter what size the screen is. So I'll just add in another div, and I'm going to make that a class of container fluid. Okay. All right, and that's a Bootstrap class, okay? So that's going to pretty much wrap everything in that as well. So that's going to be another big one. So then div, and make sure you slash to close it. Now, if you're used to using an editor like Atom, or you're a little bit further along and you've got to use like some of the other IDEs that they have, like Cloud9 or whatever, you know that a lot of this stuff will automatically fill in when you start typing. CodePen doesn't do that, so it's kind of annoying. So it kind of slows us down a little bit, but that's okay. You can always get started by doing it this way as well. So now that we have a container, we want to break this up into different rows that we can separate into columns. So think of like an Excel spreadsheet. You have a row, and in that row you can stick as many columns as you want. And Bootstrap has a default number of 12 columns that they put in, and you can kind of figure out how you want to set that stuff. And the reason that I'm going to be using this is because your background image might be different, and so you might want to right justify or left justify some of this stuff, but I'm just going to put everything in the center. And later on, if I want to modify this, I just want to have all this stuff in place to make it easier for myself if I decide I want to change it up quickly, mainly the background and how it all is laid out. So I'm going to have a row first, and then in that row I can break it up into columns. So I'm going to need another div. Class is going to be equal to row. All right, so that's my row. All right, so I have a row now. And now that I have a row, I can go back and break it up into columns, okay? Div class. Now I'm going to be using Bootstrap for this. So I'm just going to say column medium 12. It just means 12 means it's going to fill the whole thing. This medium, since I'm having a fluid container, it's not going to matter as much. But generally it has to do with the screen resolution anyway. So I forget what medium is. I think it's like 900 pixels or something. I'm not positive. I have to look that up. You can look it up later. And just because I'm going to center everything, I'm also going to add the class text center as well. because everything's just going to be centered. I don't want to have to do that with CSS later. It's easy enough to do that here. And make sure we have our closing div here as well. So now I have everything that's in this div. Hey. All right, I'm going to have in this one centered row. And what do I want in this one centered row? Well, in this one centered row, I just want to put my... So how do I do that? Well, in here, I'm just going to create an H1. So H1 slash H1. All right, and in my H1, I can write something. All right, so FCC build a random quote gene. Okay, and then I'll just use, we'll go with H3 slash H3 just to make sure we end this. And I will call this inspirational quotes. All right, so now I have a main heading and a subheading here, and that looks pretty good, right? And something else that I found actually looks really cool that I saw someone else do, which is pretty neat, is just to add a horizontal rule, which is just a really light line. It looks pretty nice to separate that from our quote, and you can just barely see that down here. And that's going to look really nice with another thing I'm going to add in a little bit. So look, check it out. Right now, I have centered words, a nice background, a horizontal rule breaking this apart, and now I've got something that's starting to look like something already. Check that out. And so what I want to do is I want to create a new row, all right, to kind of stick other stuff in. So this div here ends this. This div here ends the row. So div. So I want to still be in the container fluid though, however, right? So I'm going to start right here. And right here, I'm going to create a new row. And in that row, I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm just going to center it. So Control C, Control V. Remember to end this div as well, okay? Slash. Good to go. All right, so now I have another spot where I can do something. And if you mess anything up, you just go to tidy your HTML. That'll help you out as well. All right. So in this next little section here, everything is going to kind of be centered in here, or should be centered in the very center of this, which is what I want, in the center of our page rather, however big our page ends up being. Now, I want to, in this second section, now I break this up into a few because if I want to change stuff and shift stuff around later, I can. So I'm just going to create a separate div in here just for the quote itself, because I might want to slide that around in a different spot and realign that later. So I'm just going to add in another div. All right, and I'm going to give it a class, okay? And so I'm going to say class, and that class is going to be equal to something I'm going to make up here, and I'm going to call it the quote container, okay? And quote container. All right, and my quote container is going to be where my quotes are, well, contained. Okay. So inside of my quote container, right, I'm going to have two things, right? I'm going to have two p tags, right? So I'm going to call this p tag. I'm just going to give it an ID. I'm going to set that one to quote. All right, and I'm going to start this off with an initial value so we can see what it looks like. And this is only going to have the words quote, space. And then I will end that p tag. And since we're constantly updating, you can see, there we go. We have our horizontal rule, and we have this quote here. All right, so see how that's a different size. It's a little too small. I'm going to adjust that later with by using my quote container here. I can use that with CSS a little bit. You might have seen that before when I opened up my sample. But anyway, I'm going to take another p tag here and give it an ID of author. All right, make sure you set it equal. You know what? I did this same mistake before. Almost forgot to put the equal sign. So ID. And again, if you're used to working with a like Atom or something like that, a lot of times this stuff will populate for you, so it's kind of annoying. So you end up missing small things. And this is just going to say author space slash p, slash p, not dot p. And let me save this and take a look at what we have so far. All right, so we have inspirational quotes here, and we have quote and author that'll automatically populate later. And I have these IDs, which means I can grab them with some jQuery. And so these will just be placeholders as the page loads. And then as soon as we get quotes and authors from our API, it'll populate that. All right. Nice. Well, let's see what else we need. Well, we need buttons, right? All right, so we need buttons. So we have this div here. All right, should end that, my quote container. All right, so I want to be outside my quote container itself, and I'm going to add buttons. All right, now normally when you do a list of buttons, they end up underneath of each other. So in order to put them in line, what you can do is just use list in line, all right, which is what you can get from Bootstrap. So it's kind of cool. So I'm just going to make an unordered list, and so I don't want bullet points. So instead, I'm going to give it a class. Let's set that class to list in line. That's going to put my buttons just right next to each other. And I don't think I need a text center here, actually. But we'll see. We can always mess with that text if it's messed up. It should still be centered from this div in here anyway, so I shouldn't need that. All right, so there's my unordered list. And let's end my unordered list and give myself some space. And inside my unordered list here, I'm going to have a list item. All right, one list item. So that's just going to be li. And then I'm going to slash li. And in my list item, my single list item, I'm going to give myself a little bit of room here. I'm going to have two buttons, all right? And I'm just going to be using Bootstrap for buttons. So if you take a look at what I have here, it doesn't look like I really changed anything. I created an unordered list with one list item, and I'm listing it in line. So these things are going to be right next to each other, which is what I want. And they are going to be buttons, so which means they're going to go somewhere. So they're going to be anchor tags. All right. And so we need an href. Where does it go? Well, nowhere. Why? Because I'm going to tell it where to go with jQuery. So href, go nowhere for now. Do nothing. And then I'm going to set a class equal, all right, to, this is where Bootstrap's going to come in. I want a button, so it knows it's a Bootstrap button. I want button default. Button default does is give me that button in a light blue color, all right? I want a button to be a little bit larger, right? So I want button large, so it's a larger button. And I want to give this a name, okay? And the name of this one, since my first button is going to be get quote or new quote. In this case, I'll call it get quote. And again, this get quote is going to do something later on, and that way I can target that get quote with jQuery, okay? So I'm going to be able to target my button right here, this particular button with get quote. All right, so there we go. So there's the beginning of that anchor tag, right? And then here's the /a, end of that anchor tag. Now, inside of here, I could just put something like, it's called get quote. I'll say get quote. Let me save this and I'll show you what this looks like. So now I have a button here that's just the letters get quote. That's it. Okay. But I don't want just that. Remember how I said I want to use these font awesome icons? All right. So let's take a look at these font awesomes. And let's say I want to use this left one here. And you can kind of see how this thing scales. And I need to put this in an inline tag. So here's the stuff I need for the inline tag. I'm going to copy that. And now that goes inside of, all right, inside of this A tag, okay? So I want this to be right before this get quote text. So I'm going to Control V. Save. And, oh look, get quote. All right. Now, one problem I was having was it wasn't targeting everything that I wanted it to. So what I had to do is inside of this I class here for this button, I had to figure out, I had to put FA-FW for full width, and I don't know, it fixed the button last time because I had a weird issue with it, but it actually let this whole thing roll over properly instead of like leaking out of the button. So there we go. And so I just added in this FA.FW in this I class, and I have get quote, and now I have a button to get a quote. Kind of cool. And you could do a lot more with those buttons in Bootstrap, but I'm just keeping it simple. I'm going to do another button, but I'm getting lazy here. So I'm just going to copy this, Control C, Control V. Now I'll tidy it up to make it even with this one. But I don't want this one called get quote. I want to use this one to get quote. And I don't want this one to say get quote anymore. I want to say this one to tweet the quote. Now, this FA quote left, I don't want that icon. I want to use the Twitter icon. Right? And so here you can see inline, all the same stuff except it's FA Twitter. That's the only difference here. So font awesome Twitter. So I'm going to come back here. Font awesome, not quote left, but there. Save. And there we go. So now I have a framework. I can target buttons. I can target quote and author right here. And I have an overall layout that looks pretty nice and inspirational, right? One other thing that we're going to do later is we can do another piece of CSS on this background just in case our quote leaks out to the sides. But I'm going to save that for the very end. But for right now, this is the basis. You can kind of see this light blue of these button defaults kind of look nice, with this background here. And again, it's just creatively choosing the right image. And now you could use different danger buttons or any other buttons that you want. But for now, just kind of pick something that goes along. And you can adjust, whether this is aligned left, aligned right, by using these columns here. Remember, the columns have to add up to 12. So you can either put a blank column, use a row, and then add in a blank column, and then add the next column to it. And so as long as it adds up to 12, or you can do something like this here. All right. Column, medium, offset 4, let's say. Right. And if these have to add up to 12, all right, let's show you what it's doing. Then this one would have to be 8. All right, you see how that whole thing just bumps over like that? So you can actually play with columns and offsets to get exactly what you want. But I don't want that. I'm just going to center it. So that's how come I have these separated into different columns as well. All right, so you can see how you can kind of play with all of this with the offset and columns. So go ahead, save that. And that's going to be it for this time. Next time, I'm going to go into the JavaScript section and how we're actually going to play with the API itself and how to get that part coded. And then maybe I'll get some final thoughts on some CSS and get this thing cleaned up as well. All right. So hopefully that was helpful. And then I will see you next time when we start adding in some JavaScript.